morning and welcome to everyone to the second day of the online winter school on ethics and aesthetics, organized by the Manipal Center for European Studies, the John Monnet Center of Excellence, and the Department of Philosophy, MAHE. I am Medini Hegde, a research scholar at Manipal Center for European Studies. The winter school got off to a brilliant start yesterday with a keynote address given by Professor H.S. Shiv Prakash, who is also the program director of this winter school. The inaugural session was followed by two enchanting sessions by Dr. Manu Devadevan and Professor Parul Pandyadhar. Today, we will be exploring the classical and indigenous traditions of ethics and aesthetics in the Indian context. The first session for today, Our Values in Tinai Songs Conservable, will be delivered by Professor Nirmal Selvamony in conversation with Dr. Meera Baindur. Please allow me to introduce Dr. Baindur before I hand the floor to her. Dr. Meera Baindur is a philosopher working as an associate professor at the Department of Arts, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Manipal University, Jaipur. She has a wide-ranging area of interests in Indian philosophy and environmental humanities, such as the conceptualization of nature in Indian thought, ecological and environmental ethics, religion and environment, environmental ethics, and sustainability issues. Currently, her research includes themes in lived concepts of Indian philosophy, including place, aesthetics, decoloniality, ecofeminism, and gender issues. Over to you, Dr. Baindur.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be a discussant for Professor Selvamony. And the way the session will go is that he will have an uninterrupted time of about 1 hour to give his ideas and share his valuable insights on Tinai. And then we will have the discussion. Personally, I just wanted to acknowledge that Dr. Nirmal Selvamony is a well-known philosopher and has worked in the area of Tinai studies, Tamil literature, philosophy, and has contributed richly to regional philosophy. And he's also been my mentor in some sense because I've worked on nature and Indian thought, and he has been my mentor there. So that is like my I'm so glad that he's here to share his valuable insights on Tinai. I request Medini to kindly give the formal introduction to Dr. Nirmal.
And introduce Professor Selvamony. Professor Nirmal Selvamony was former professor and head of the Department of English Studies and Dean of School of Social Sciences Humanities at Central University of Tamil Nadu. His major areas of interest in the last 4 decades have been alternative, that is Tinai society, Tinai studies, Tolkappiyam, eco-criticism, Tamil musicology, poetics, and theory. He pioneered the Tinai social movement from the late 1970s by offering the first ever Tinai-based academic courses, Tamil poetics, later known as eco-literature, and Tamil musicology in Indian university system, founding the forum now known as Tinai, formerly OSLE India, launching the first ever journal in eco-criticism, Indian Journal of Eco-Criticism, and by writing extensively about Tinai. Professor Selvamony's course, Tamil Poetics of the early 1980s, introduced eco-criticism in the Indian academia. He has developed a new area of study known as Tinai musicology, also known as South Indian eco-musicology. He revived in the 1980s early Indian philosophy known as Kutchi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Literally, which means vision. From the evidences in the ancient Tamil texts, a philosophical tradition that precedes the darshanas. He has also formulated a theory of Putti Tinai, Neo Tinai poesis, formerly oikopoetics, widely used by several scholars as a theoretical framework. He has played the guitar professionally, scripted and directed plays, as well as composed music for plays. Welcome, Professor Selvamony. Professor Meera, if you could please take this ahead.
So, Professor, would you please start your valuable input into the idea of Tinai? I know that Tinai songs have been ancient songs, and Professor Selvamony will tell us about these. They have been songs of the Sangam literature, and they have beautiful references to a combination of both landscape as well as the human condition. And to find an ecologically embedded world inside the world of poetry is something that is very unique to the Tinai tradition. So it is very, very phenomenological, it's experiential, it's literary. So truly an interdisciplinary field of study. So I welcome Dr. Nirmal Selvamony to talk to us a little about these beautiful songs. It's wrong to call them poems. They're actually songs. They would have been sung by the people in the road and in the baths and in the jungles and everywhere, I think. And so he's going to talk to us today about the values and the idea of conserving. Can we conserve these values in Tinai? Sir, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Meera Baindu, for that very generous words about me. And thank you so much for the words about Tinai songs also. I think that's sufficient introduction about the topic. Thank you, Richa, also for your introduction. Let me begin with a Tamil greeting, Vanakkam, which means obeisance. I thank Professor Shiv Prakash, the director of this online winter school, Dr. Tanima Nigam, and Dr. Richa, its conveners, for inviting me to be part of this program. We're deliberating on ethics and aesthetics from yesterday onwards. In my presentation, the ethical will be represented by only one of its aspects, value, and the aesthetic will be synonymous with the poetic. However, as my focus will be on the praxis of the ethical, the poetic, for me, is the praxic. In other words, I want to focus on the practice of a key value of Tinai community, privileging Tinai over its human member. I also want to affirm that this value should be the catalyst that transforms our everyday action into poiesis. I'll just repeat that. So my focus will be on the value of Tinai community, which is privileging Tinai over its human member. And I also want to affirm that this value should be the catalyst that transforms our everyday action into poiesis. So if I can impress upon the participants this particular point, I will count this interaction really purposeful. Now, what is Tinai? The earliest Tamil grammatical text called Tolkappiyam speaks of 4 basic types of Tinai, each based on a primordial biomic land area. Mullai based on the scrubland, Kurinji on hilly terrain, Marudam on riverine plain, and Neidal on the seacoast. A 5th called Palai, based on the arid land area, is a transitional one, resulting from the changes that either the scrubland or the mountain slope is likely to undergo due to such phenomena as drought, overgrazing, or fire. Now, each of these Tinaigal is a primordial type of community in which the humans and non-humans coexisted to a large extent harmoniously for tens of thousands of years before the origin of what we call the state or state-like societies, say some 10,000 years ago. In fact, the word Tinai itself means harmonious relationship among humans and non-humans, including the place and all its natural cultural occupants. As the place and the natural cultural features of one Tinai are unlike those of another, each community is also unlike the other. The state-like societies are also diverse and not easily subsumed under a single definition, as Graber and Wengro assert in their 2021 book, The Dawn of Everything. Though these new societies overran Tinai communities, they have not eliminated Tinai completely. Here and there, we do find Tinai communities even today at various stages of threatened existence. The two entities, Tinai and state or state-like society, differ in one important aspect I call differentiating ontic continuity. Now, those members of a Tinai community, human and non-human, who interact with each other are marked by a continuity of their being, whereas those members of a state or state-like society who interact with each other do not necessarily enjoy such continuity. In Tinai community, this continuity results from harmonious relationship, as I said earlier, among actually its members. Now, this is borne out by the etymology of the word Tinai itself. It derives from the Tamil word inai, which means spouse, spousal relationship, and fifth tonal relation in music. Among all possible two-note combinations in an octave, the most harmonious is the fifth or inai. In this relation, the two notes that combine do so in two modes, by losing and also by affirming their individual identities. In other words, in an inai relation, a musical ear can tell that the two pitches, like sa and pa, for example, sound as if they were a single one, and also as two different pitches. A similar relationship obtains in love also. The partners in love lose their pre-love identities and realize a new one. Tinai, which derives from inai, which means harmonious relation between two entities, is not only the primordial communitarian order, but also harmonious relation among all its members. Such harmony may be described as a sort of, shall I say, heterarchic relation that blends equity and authority at the same time. Relationship is not an idea which exists only in our heads. It is praxis. Praxis of this value is also poiesis, because the Tinai people who cherished this value saw poiesis as action. Their term for art was cheyur, which means making something perfectly, a near equivalent of Greek poiesis. If so, all instances of perfect making, including human actions, are cheyur or poiesis, not only music, verse making, drama, dance, sculpture, and painting. I would like to urge the importance of poiesis based on the value of the precedence of Tinai over the individual through some illustrative songs and poems. So much about the theme. Now a word about my approach. My treatment of the illustrative poems is eco-critical, not only because Professor Shiv Prakash wanted me to address the eco-critical in this presentation, but also because Tinai is already what I call a proto-eco-critical theory. This means my approach will neither be an instance of the Ruckertian type of eco-criticism, which consists in the application of an ecological principle to a text, nor the Grotfeldian type that consists in exploring the connection between a text and the environment. But it will still be a variety of eco-criticism I call Puttinai, or Neo-Tinai poiesis, which Richa Gupta mentioned in the introduction, which interprets texts from the perspective of principles derived ultimately from Tinai theory. A critical approach based on Tinai is eco-critical because Tinai is a kind of ecological theory that precedes quite anachronistically both ecology and eco-criticism. I'm extremely pleased to be part of this event because it turns the spotlight on the ethical and the aesthetic. While I'm euphoric over the focus on ethics, I'm also equally surprised because this is not the age of the ethical at all. So Zaina, the word ethics has fallen by the wayside. Some may pay lip service to it, but many see it as an irrelevant word and idea. The 1980s, ethical values played a central role in the academia, not because everyone was living in an age of ethics, but because the society was badly in need of it. My colleagues and I swore by it. I've been the convener of the mandatory foundational undergraduate course called Value Education at Madras Christian College, and a co-editor of a textbook on the subject. The book was titled Value Education Today, Explorations in Social Ethics. When I joined Madras Christian College as a faculty member in 1982, one of the first papers I presented was titled Values Among the Scrub of Tambram. But in the 1990s, things changed. No one swore by values anymore. In 1991, India embraced an economic policy which opened up a new era in the history of this country. Such things as liberalization and globalization were the key ideas in this policy, and they effected nothing less than a paradigm shift. They displaced the little society-oriented socialism that was left and replaced it with individual-oriented capitalist market economy. The market was liberalized and globalized, and in the new economy, the need for the individual human, or need of the individual human, was the motor that powered the economy. Along with the value of social emphasis, the values that undergirded the emphasis were also flung out of the window. What you held dear until now suddenly became out of place. All of a sudden, value itself was antiquated. It looked like a word from a language nobody spoke or understood anymore. Now, a teacher is not appointed, but hired. Educational institution, like a factory, is a place that produces qualified hands rather than makes men and women whole. Students who have successfully completed their academic programs are now products of these factories. In line with such thinking, recently educational practices assessed by metrics such as H-index and impact factor. Until the early 1990s, impact to me was a pejorative term associated only with road accidents. Until 1991, I would have shuddered to think of my alma mater, meaning nurturing mother, as an employer and myself as an employee. Well, it's not hard to see what distinguishes the pre-91 India from its post-91 counterpart. The values that underlie our language and our worldview tell apart these two different time periods. Now we are able to speak of the human as a product that could be hired and quantified due to our strange capability for perfecting the art of dehumanization. The study of values called axiology is a discipline probably that emerged in the beginning of this century, 20th century. But this does not mean that people had not thought about values and articulated them earlier. Values played a central role in the lives of the early Tamil people, and they had expressed their ideas pertaining to them in several early Tamil texts like Tolkappiyam and Sangam anthologies, to which Dr. Meera referred. We may speak about values, but they are communicated best without words. The value someone attributes to something becomes live and real through gesture, facial expression, physical action, and other contextual factors. In similar ways, values existed and were disseminated in Tinai communities also. The head of the family, the chieftain, and the elders who were members of the public forum in a Tinai community were expected to be embodiments of values of community, collective and conscious of that community. Often this collective mind was invoked to affirm the importance of values. Besides these, textualized wisdom of the sages and one's own intuitive knowledge also sustained values. But the most significant sources of the knowledge of values in Tinai were the non-human members of this community, such as the land, plants, animals, and birds. Humans closely observed them and learned all the important lessons of life from them. One of the best places for such learning was the barren, arid land, where people interacted with birds and animals in the wild better than they did outside. When people traveled, they had to cross such land areas quite often. We'll take a look at a Tinai song in which a man happened to observe closely the love of an elephant for his mate. when the man crossed that patch of arid land. The wife of this man was at home at that point, eagerly awaiting his return. The confidante, the only companion of the wife, consoles the wife, saying that her husband is likely to see a tusker breaking the branches of the only tree in that parched land and feeding his hungry mate without eating those branches himself. This demonstration of love, she believed, would certainly persuade her husband also to return quickly and shower on her his great love. And here's that song. Nasai peridudayar, nalgalum nalguvar, pidipasi kalayiya, perungai velam, mencinai yam பொழிக்கும் அன்பின தோழி அவர் சென்ற ஆரே. And here is my translation of this song. Great love he has for you, and he will shower it on you, my dear. Along his paths, he's likely to see the loving animals, the tusker with his large trunk, stripping the tender branches of the artery to feed his hungry mates. If love is selflessness, an affirmation of commitment to the other, we find it here. Love is easily expressed when things are favorable, but when the situation is dire, one is tempted to compromise love and become self-centered. In stark contrast, the tusker's expression of selflessness, even in the face of deprivation, is the test of true love. Evidently, the most important thing the hero learns from the elephants is love, the most perfect type of action, shall I say, poiesis, desired by humans and non-humans alike. And it is the expectation of the heroine that the values the hero learns from his non-human companions will transform his interaction with her also into poiesis or chayu. Though the song speaks of love between the human and non-human couples, it applies to the entire Tinai community. Love between the heterosexual partners of a Tinai cannot be at odds with love that binds all the members of that community. Therefore, the value of Tinai precedence is a necessary condition for promoting love and harmony among all the members of Tinai. Positive values privilege Tinai over the individual. Privileging Tinai implies affirming Tinai values pertaining to all its members. One such key value was pugar. The meanings usually attributed to this word are praise, fame, and renown. But in early Tamil texts, this word is often quite the opposite of pari, which means blame or guilt, the dishonorable consequence of one's action. If so, pugar is the opposite of such consequence of one's action. It causes public honor, something that is the source of great pride for the community. The near equivalent of such a thing is glory. Further, pugar is often spoken of in the context of afterlife as the ultimate consequence of a good life. In Tinai society, pugar is not wholly confinable to a human individual. If it is, it may not be authentic. It is a communitarian value affirmed through the action of a single person. In Tinai community, often pugar was associated with combat. The ultimate goal of combat is pugar, not victory. Even if one loses a combat, one should do so gloriously, honorably. One of the tests of glorious loss is what is called the wound of honor, a wound caused while fighting the opponent face to face. Its opposite is the wound caused while fleeing the opponent, which is the worst form of dishonor one can bring to one's family and community. In combats, mothers would not accept dishonorable death of their valorous sons at all. Here is a song about one such mother, and it is composed by the renowned Tamil female poet Avvayar. கடல் கிளர்ந்தன்ன கட்டூர் நாப்பண் வெந்து வாய்வடித்த வேல்தலை பெயரி தோடு கைத்தெழு துறந்து எரி ஞாட்பின் வருபடை போழ்ந்து வாய்ப்பட விளங்கி இடைப்படை அழுவத்து சிதைந்து வேறாகிய சிறப்புடையாளன் மாண்பு கண்டருளி வாடுமுலை ஊறிச் சுரந்தன ஓடா பூட்கை விடலை தாய்க்கே. And here's my translation of that song. In the middle of the combat field, next to an ocean-like camp, he who turned against his opponents with spear sharpened in fire, led his army forward, tore through the charging army of foes, and resisting them created fighting space in the deep middle field, was mangled. Witnessing the honor of the great man, did the shrunken breasts of the mother of the unfleeing and resolute brave youth milk secrete and eject. This Tinai song tells us that a mother who probably watched her son's brave end in the combat field, and when she learned that he felt gloriously, was much happier than she was when she had given birth to him. The evolutionary ideal of survival of the fittest was certainly not the value of Tinai. Between avoidance of shameful deed and survival, one is expected to choose avoidance of shameful deeds. In fact, even if one came into great wealth by compromising values, one had to reject that and stand up for values. In this regard, the values of Tinai contrast markedly with those we find in the state or state-like societies which privilege expediency and advantage over ethical principles. Today, we think of values, ethics, and beauty as independent topics, but in Tinai society, they were inseparably integrated with conduct. To describe the pugal her son has earned by his unfleeing bravery in the thick of the battle, the aged mother uses the term mandu, which not only means greatness, but also beauty. Significantly, mandu is not the kind of beauty Baumgarten had in mind when he coined the term aesthetics. It's a kind of beauty that's not confinable to the human body or even the world, because it's as much otherworldly as it is this worldly. It is a kind of beauty that results from an act of bravery and rewards the agent with a glorious afterlife. If so, could we say that we're talking about something like Tinai centrism? It may be helpful if we distinguish Tinai centrism from what eco-critics call ecocentrism. Ecocentrism is commonly understood as an equivalent of biocentrism, which emerged as an antonym of anthropocentrism. If the anthropos, or human, is in the center of the anthropocentric universe, the organism is in the biocentric. As the human is also one among several other organisms, in biocentrism, all organisms, including humans, are regarded as beings of equal value. While biocentrism looks upon organisms as individuals, Tinai regards them as communitarian members. If the individual organism enjoys intrinsic value and sovereign importance in biocentrism, it is only secondary importance in Tinai. It is Tinai, the community, which is of sovereign value, not its member, whether human or non-human. Therefore, we need to move beyond ecocentrism or biocentrism and embrace Tinai centrism. Let us see how a contemporary Tinai community regards its own Tinai. Niyamgiri, or the Mountain of Law, is a hill range in Kalahandi and Raigada districts in southwest of Odisha. Spanning 250 square kilometers, rising up to 1,509 meters, it's home to the ancestral god Niyamaraja and the tribal people called Dongriyakond and Kudiyakond. While the Dongriyakond, numbering up to 8,000, live in a specific area in Niyamgiri, the Kudiyakond live in several places in these hills. These hills, we are told, have 88 million tons of bauxite, the raw material for alumina and aluminium. Protesting against bauxite mining in Niyamgiri, a whole movement was launched by activists. One of the members of this group, Rajkishore Sunani, a poet, singer, and activist, came up with the song for Niyamgiri, which may be regarded as a contemporary Tinai song, and I quote a few stanzas from it. We will never leave the mountain, stream, forest, and our home. We will not give up the struggle, even if we have to sacrifice our lives. Dear friends, we will not leave the struggle. Our Devata is the one who always gives. Our God is our life. Dear friends, the mountain, forest, land, and streams are our gods. The land provides us with greenery, trees, fruits, and roots. And the sky provides the air and gives the water of the stream. The water flows like mother's milk. Dear friends, we drink the milk of the motherland. You can stay alive after leaving your gods, but we cannot live after leaving our God. Whether or not it's true, we don't know. How can you stay alive by giving up nature? Oh dear, this science is the truth. Dear friends, please accept the truth and discard untruths. The mountain, land, forest, and streams are our main deities. Our land is full of forest, fruits, roots, and animals. We are neither Hindu, nor Muslim, nor Christians. We are the tribes and worshippers of nature. Dear friends, we are equal, man and woman. Dear friends, we enjoy freedom here. I've interacted with the indigenous people of Odisha a couple of decades ago and found that they were in fact non-Tamil speaking Tinai communities in this country. Summarily, the life of all the Kon people and the other non-human inhabitants is the mountain itself, which is their dwelling place as well as their ancestor. Each individual human considers herself or himself only a part of the mountain, and the mountain itself is their Tinai. Obviously, Tinai gains precedence over a single member, and such a value has helped these people envisage, shall I say, a life of poiesis. Consider the lines of Sunani's Song of Niyamgiri, which upholds Tinai centrism. We will never leave the mountain, stream, forest, and our home. We will not give up the struggle, even if we have to sacrifice our lives. Isn't it amazing to see Tinai centrism continuing to rule the worldview of the present-day primal people? Nowhere is this value more evident than in a Tinai song that tells us how an Alexandrian laurel tree, a member of a family in coastal Tinai, was valued by the human members of that family. In this song, we find a boy trying to court his girlfriend under this tree. Quite unexpectedly, the girl registers sort of mild protest, saying they had better move elsewhere. The boy is perplexed, but the girl explains. She says that her mother raised her as well as the tree, but nursed the tree with special food and told the girl that the tree sister was more special to her than her own biological daughter. And here is that song. விளையாடும் ஆயமொடு வெண் மணல் எழுத்தி மறந்தனம் துறந்த கால்முளை அகைய நெய் பெய் தீம்பால் பெய்தினிது வளர்ப்ப நும்மினும் சிறந்தது நுவ்வையாகும் என்று அன்னை கூறினள் புன்னையது நலனே. அம்ம நாணதும் நும்முடு நகையே விருந்தின் பாணர் விளரிசை கடுப்ப பலம்புரி வான்கோடு நரலும் இலங்கு நீர் துறைகெழு கொண்ட நீ நல்கின் இறைவிடு நீழல் பிறவுமார் உளவே. And here is A.K. Ramanujan's translation of this lovely song. Playing with friends one time, we pressed a ripe seed into the white sand and forgot about it until it sprouted. And when we nursed it tenderly, pouring sweet milk with melted butter, Mother said, it qualifies as a sister to you, and it's much better than you, praising this laurel tree. So, we are embarrassed to laugh with you here, O man of the seashore, with glittering waters where white conch shells, their spirals turning right, sound like the soft music of the birds at a feast. Yet, if you wish, there is plenty of shade elsewhere. Did the mother's praise imply neglect of her human daughter? To answer this question, we need to understand how trees were looked upon in Tinai. As trees outlived humans and were revered as ancestors, they enjoyed a coveted place in several primate societies. For the succeeding generations of humans, this particular tree could be a common ancestor who's not only the head of the family, but also the embodiment of familial or Tinai identity. For example, the ancient Tamil name Mangudi Marudanar tells us that Marudanar was a member of a Kudi or family that lived under the Ma, a mango tree. And Alangudi Vanganar is the name of one Vanganar whose Kudi or family dwelt under an Al or banyan tree. Such tree-centered familial identity has survived even in our own time in the state of Kerala and southern Tamil Nadu. Consider the modern Malayali name, Varghese Pilamute. The name points to one Varghese who belongs to a family that dwells by the mudu or base of a pillar or pala or jack tree. One of my own grandfathers is known as Puliyamuttu Tata, meaning tamarind grandfather, because he was a grandfather who lived at the base of a tamarind tree, which lent identity to our family. The specialness of the tree sister consists of a value that is greater than that of the other members of the family. In other words, the non-human sister and the Tinai relationship represents are more valuable to the family than the human sister herself. The greatness of the tree does not negate the kin relation in the family. Being sisters, the kin identity of the human sister and tree sister is egalitarian, though the sisters are not of equal value in the family. To refer to the specialness of the tree, the poet uses the word nalam, which means goodness or virtue, benefit, and also beauty. In some editions of this song, the word chirappu replaces nalam, but chirappu is not apt in the text because already the mother has characterized the tree as a special one by using the verbal form chirandadu. That's how the song goes. If chirappu were our choice, we would make the poet culpable of repetition. So I prefer nalam over chirappu in this context. Now, this is the most important word in this song, as it clinches the nature of the tree, which the girl wants her lover to understand. As a sister, the tree expects the human sister to conduct herself with propriety and thereby has a good influence on her human sister. By providing oil for lamps and wood for making parts of the boat and ingredients for making medicines, the tree is highly beneficial to the coastal dwellers. Its showy white flowers and attractive evergreen foliage, the tree has earned the name beauty leaf tree also. Surely it's an ornament in front of a coastal dwelling. By being a good influence, by being useful to the family, and by beautifying their homestead, the tree sister helps the human members of the family to transform their ordinary actions into poesis, should the humans be inclined to do so. Interestingly, the specialness of the tree does not in any way deter the human members from rebuking it for what they think is irresponsible behavior on the part of the tree. One of the Tinai songs tells us that a husband who was going on a journey promised his wife that he would return home when the laburnum trees in their homestead bloomed. They usually did with the onset of the monsoon, but now, when they flowered, the man had not returned home. At this, the wife was provoked and she rebuked the trees. And this is what she said. மடவமன்ற தடவு நிலை கொன்றை கல்விறங்கு அத்தம் சென்றோர் கூறிய பருவம் வார அளவை கொம்புச்சேர் கொடியினர் ஊழ்த்த வம்பமாரியை காரணமதித்தே. And here is my translation of this. Stupid, surely, are those large-stemmed laburnum trees that mistook the unseasonal rains and put out on their branches lush pendulous racemes, even before the monsoon he spoke of, when setting out on the stony, arid paths. Such value relation in Tinai is hierarchic, if I may say so, not unlike similar power relation between a chieftain and the bard. In some respects, the chieftain, as the leader of the community, enjoys more power than the bard, but the bard has the right to criticize the chieftain when necessary, and in such a situation, the bard wields more power than the chieftain. But all this changed when state institutions and apparatuses were imposed upon Tinai. In the state or state-like society, trees were not members of the Tinai family anymore. They were reduced to objects, only to be used by humans. Either they were useful or useless. Whether they were useful or useless, they were beings much inferior to humans. Two couplets from Thiruvarur speak of the new degraded status of the tree. Here is the first. Uram oruvarukku ullavarukku addillar maram makkal adale veru. Maram is incidentally the Tamil word for tree. And here is the translation by Drew, Lazarus, and Ellis. Energy is mental wealth. Those men who are destitute of it are only trees in the form of men. And here's my second. Aram polum kurmayarenum maram polvar makkal pandilladavar. The translation by the same scholars. He who is destitute of true human qualities only resembles a tree, though he may possess the sharpness of a fire. While the Tinai community regards a tree as a sister in a family, the state or state-like society does not do so. When the tree is seen as a sister, the human relates to the tree in ways quite different from the ways in which he or she would to the tree when the tree is regarded as a mere object. As a sister, the tree commanded respect, and that is why the coastal girl was shy to talk to a boyfriend under her tree sister's shade. On other occasions, when the tree was a sacred one, she was revered by humans because she was an ancestor. Such value is relational in that it is not confinable to any one member of Tinai family. Depending upon the context, the magnitude of the value of the member is variable. On the one hand, the tree is more special than a human. And on the other, the human takes the liberty to chide the tree for supposedly irresponsible behavior, even as the bard would his chieftain. While a human could live and hold together a family only for one generation, a tree could for more than one. In other words, it represented Tinai better than a human did in this particular regard. For this reason, the names of the parts of Tinai, namely Mudal, Karu, and Uri, were derived ultimately from the tree itself, being the location for a clan and uniting its members across several generations. A tree is Mudal for a clan, being the generative center like a nucleus for several familial generations. It is Karu, and being the home of the guardian spirit that guards all the families of the clan. It is the protective skin or Uri of the body clan. In short, the human and the non-human become continuous in the tree without losing the necessary difference between the two. I would like to cite another instance of such human-non-human relation from a Tinai in the Indian Northeast. It is a society of the Mishmi people who live in the Dibang Valley district of Arunachal Pradesh. The district was created in 1980, and it's of special interest to the country due to its tiger population. Though there were only 29 animals, according to a government report published in 2018, a little less than half the total area of the valley has already been named Dibang Wildlife Sanctuary. As this sanctuary is also the habitat of tigers, the Indian government is planning to change the name of the sanctuary to Dibang Tiger Reserve. Now, tiger conservation in India goes back to pre-independence days. In 1936, the first tiger conservation project called Jim Corbett National Park was established in Uttarakhand. But the Indian government declared tiger as the national animal in 1973 when it launched Project Tiger to protect the tigers in the country. The Indian government looks upon this animal as its wildlife wealth. But how do the Mishmi people see this animal? Well, Ambika Ayyadurai, who has been studying the Mishmi people, was talking to them in 2016 about the Tiger Reserve project. A 45-year-old Mishmi man named Angeche asked her, why a tiger reserve? We don't hunt tigers. They are our brothers. Tigers and humans were born to the same mother. We kill tigers only as a last option when they become a human threat or when they are killed in traps accidentally. We are protecting them anyway. If we leave aside the question of tiger conservation and focus on the relation between these people and the non-human animal, we see how the sibling relation between them has persisted for thousands of years until about 6 years ago in this country. Angeche is certainly not metaphorizing the kinship relation between humans and tigers. Such kinship is not characteristic of the state or state-like societies which emerged by destroying forests, producing surplus food, domesticating animals and birds, creating economic and political power centers, and sedentarism, and isolating or changing or destroying Tinai drastically. In the new society, the relation among its members was no more harmonious as it was in Tinai. It's now typically homoarchic or rigidly hierarchic, resulting in the ushering in of the epoch of the Anthropocene. Being the epoch of the human, the basic presupposition of the Anthropocene, which has precipitated the destruction of the planet Earth, is in fact axiological. According to this presupposition, the most highly valuable entity in the planet is the human, not the non-human world. Let us look at just one example, and this comes from the pen of a contemporary Tamil poet. புஞ்சையின் அஞ்சையாகி ஒதுங்க நிழல் இல்லை, நிழல் மட்டுமாயில்லை, கம்பு இல்லை, சோளம் இல்லை, ஏறி படர்ந்து மாலையில் பூக்கும் பீர்க்கு இல்லை, அரவம் கேட்டு கடலை கொடிகளுக்கு அடியிலிருந்து குபீரென பறக்கும் காடைகள் இல்லை, வேலிக்கள்ளியில் வேம்பு நிழலில் புறா இல்லை, செம்போத்து இல்லை, குயில் இல்லை, குயில் பார்த்து பாட புஞ்சைகளின் குரோட்டனான கொன்றை இல்லை, சிற்றோடையில் கட்டிய மொட்டை அணையால் எங்கள் ஊர் பாழாகிறது, காவிரியில் கட்டிய அணைகளால் தொலைவுக்கும் காடுகள் அழிந்தன, சோற்றுக்காக காடுகளை இழந்தோம், மழை இல்லை, காடுமற்றது, சோறும் அற்றது. And here is my translation of this poem. With the dry lands becoming wet, there is no shade anymore. Is it just that there is no shade? No millet, no maize, no gourd that climbs and blooms in the evening, no partridges that stir out suddenly from under the groundnut plants at the slightest sound, no pigeons in the shade of the neem among the cactus hedge, no cuckoos, no quails, no cassia, the croton of the dry lands to inspire the coral to sing. The bare dam built on the small stream laid waste our village. The dams on Kaveri had destroyed forests far and wide. We lost our forests for rice, and then no rain. Now, no forest and no rice. The speaker persona of this poem mourns the willful conversion of the dryland non-human world into wetland, and thereby destroying the farmer for the sake of food for the human. This was possible because now humans in the state or state-like society regarded the non-human world as mere resource. The term resource originally belonged to the semantic domain of industry, as we know. The first occurrence of the word was in 1779. Then it meant, I quote, a country's wealth, means of raising money and supplies, I end quote. A good part of this wealth consists of non-human organisms, which were part of the Tinai family. Sadly, have they now descended to the level of resources, as the relation between humans and non-humans was reinterpreted as a homoarchic, exploitative one in the industrial society. The dehumanized human resource is also the dehumanizing agent, the anti-human human. If Nirmal is destroyed for the bauxite in the mountain, the dryland ecosystem is for the sake of producing a single variety of food, rice, for a single member of a Tinai family, a human. Such a project is fired by the excessive value humans assign to their own species, they're only to affirm and produce the dehumanized anti-human ultimately. This value or disvalue is based on the bias known as speciesism, or favoring one's own species as against the interests of other species and members of the other species. Speciesism is a type of axiological exceptionalism which has contributed to the disruption of the harmonious relation among the members of Tinai. When we privilege the communitarian relation over humans, we do not accord the highest value to individual humans as we do now. This is the reason why in Tinai society, dignity or non and familial integrity or katpu were valued more than human life itself. It is in the same spirit that the indigenous inhabitants of Nirmal would say, we will never leave the mountain, stream, forest, and our home. We will not give up the struggle, even if we have to sacrifice our lives. To the people of Nirmal, their Tinai is more valuable to them than their own individual lives. And that is why they would readily die to save their Tinai. Tinai has been represented by the family tree for ages. And that's why it's more special to the family than its individual human member. Such a family tree is certainly not natural resource. If so, how could the Tinai and family tree continue to survive the onslaught of the industrial society? Some of us, to whom this is an important question, recommend conservation. But what do we mean by it? How could we conserve the tree that is more special than humans? Ecology and environmentalism are not adequate, I should say, to conserve the tree, mainly because they are not based on the type of relation between the humans and non-humans essential for conservation of the non-human. Rather, they are based on the concept of environment, which privileges the human over the non-human and regards the human as an entity that is disconnected from the non-human. Conservation may be the effect of proper human interaction with the non-human. Humans cannot conserve the non-human because it is the non-human world which makes possible the human, not the other way. Because the non-human was already always there, the humans could emerge on the planet later and reproduce their kind. In fact, the non-human conserves the humans by providing oxygen and food and other necessary conditions for existence. The same cannot be said of the humans. We do not provide the necessary conditions for the well-being of the non-humans, except for those we have enslaved unjustly. But humans desperately need the non-humans. Though we need them, our relation to them has been destructive. Unless we change our anthropocenic and homoarchic relation into a Tinai one, the Tinai members such as the mountain, tree, and tiger, and people like the Kond and Mishmi will perish before our own eyes, and so will we. If what we mean by conservation is letting the non-human continue to be healthy and thriving into the future, then such non-humans as the mountain, tree, and tiger should be regarded as members of an interspecific family. When this happens, more special will they be than the human siblings. Then Tinai itself will conserve trees, tigers, mountains, and humans. Believe me, Tinai alone can. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Selvamony. That was touching to the heart, because I guess I was sitting in the Tinai when I was listening to you. I'm a complete Tinai convert, let me say that, ever since we started working with Tinai. I'll take a few minutes. I think you will take a 5-minute rest. During that time, instead of closing the session, I will just summarize certain points that struck me as wonderful and kind of helping other people also find their own Tinai in your talk.
I'd like to listen to you, so I'll stay on and then probably take a 5-minute break.
And we will open up for questions. Just 5 minutes, not much. First of all, when you said ontic continuity, I just want to clarify for the non-philosophers in the audience. It means that there is a continuous consciousness between ourselves and the world. The way we exist is called ontic continuity. So I want to say that the ontic continuity, in my own work following Tinai, you said there is a difference, and when you're continuous with some people, a lot of people have talked that when you mix yourself up with the other person, so you're not able to distinguish yourself from the other person. That does not happen in the Tinai. You do not become the environment, you don't become the mountain. You are different from the mountain. You know the difference between, the sister knows the difference between herself and the tree sister. So difference is egalitarian. It is not equality. So questions like when I go and talk about environmental issues to other people, people say, oh, then you stop eating plants. Oh, these people are hunting. The hunting can occur in egalitarianism because we are food, and tiger is also, we are eaten and we are being eaten because there's a difference between us. Otherwise, we can't live and survive in nature. So it is a difference. But what is not there in the Tinai community is distance, because the distance brings exclusion. When you distance yourself from people, there is exclusion, there is divorce, there is hierarchy. So distancing is breakup in the modern language. So you're not breaking up. You are making sure that when it is not like when the husband eats food, the wife's food is already eaten. That is a state community. Because if the leaders are happy, the praja is not necessarily happy. So the question is, therefore, I have been looking at this dura and binna as values, which is difference and distance. And between difference and distance, there is also a continuity of a seed becoming a tree. A seed is definitely different from a tree, but it is not distant from a tree. So if you kill the seed, you also kill the seed, kill the tree. The egalitarianism pays attention to the moral weightage or the value weightage of different things. So you can look at the value weightage and the moral weightage, yet you can be ontically one with the landscape and the environment. The second point that I really enjoyed listening to again was the value without words, performative and narrative values. And this is very important in the aesthetics, because aesthetics, particularly Professor Shiv Prakash and others would be much more better to talk about this, but the sahridayatva of aesthetics, the sahridayatva of, it is the same heartedness. And I've been trying to find a translation for it. It doesn't fall, it falls inside the Tinai vocabulary. It doesn't fall inside the vocabulary of our English post-state colonial ideas. Sahridayatva, oneness of heart, which is also captured by the word that you wonderfully suggested, inai. And that is the process of not, we keep saying surrender. When you want to love somebody, you surrender in, I don't think the word is surrender. I think the word is yield. Because what I find in the modern community is people are not willing to give up even a little bit to, we call it accommodation, right? Thoda sa adjust kar le. I think I have noticed that when I'm walking suddenly walking in Jaipur, it never rains. I'm now in the desert in Palai. But I'm also in a kind of Palaivana Cholai because there's a lot of greenery around me. But what I see is when we were walking for the first time, when it started raining, people were actually coming outdoors and literally drenching themselves in the rain, which is so much different from we live in a slightly off city area. So people are actually celebrating and enjoying and getting drenched. They went out for a walk in the rain because it's so rare here. But what I was thinking at that time is, it is not only here, but when I was younger, when it rains, instead of going inside and locking myself up in my room, I used to go out in the rain and enjoy the rain, enjoy the discomfort of being wet and cold. But that was like a celebration. I yielded my comfort to enjoy being one with the rain and the fall of the drops on my face and my wet hair and all that. So there is a kind of process of yielding and accepting which comes when you love the environment. And I think more and more as we want, when we love also, if we want to change the other person, modify, change so that we feel comfortable, I think that's what we are doing in nature. Even if people say they are environmental friendly, they are eco-friendly, this is what they keep trying to do. They keep trying to change nature so that we will feel comfortable. The human-centeredness of altering the environment to suit our needs, which, as you pointed out, is the epoch of the human, is definitely not conservation. Even in conservation, the whole idea of utilitarian conservation, where, oh, our children will not see the tiger, that is not the point of it. The point is not about seeing the tiger, but our children will not know what it is to relate to the non-human in these forms, to relate to the different forms of nature and the aesthetics of given by ethical values rather than given by certain kinds of, the praise of beauty in nature, which is a kind of a Western, daffodil. I mean, there is beauty in a spider and a cockroach, if you can see that. And that's something which is the aesthetics of ethics. I think that is where environmental movements and our relationship would be modified a great deal. So also I got this idea that instead of prioritizing, we have what is called the Shrestha theory we follow model behavior. And when the model becomes the non-human, our praxis turns to poiesis. And I think I love that idea, where environment itself becomes our teacher and environment becomes our model. Because when we see, I was thinking of all the communities that you talked about, and the Bishnoi community is one more. And I have been working with the Bishnois a little bit. I'm yet to understand where their poetry and songs come from. It's requiring a little bit of translation problem. But they also, the woman gave up her life for the tree, inspiring the Chipko and the Apiko movements. So for me, the Bishnois are also Tinai community, and they also are not Hindus. By the way, they're not Vaishnavites. They're Bishnois, they're followers of 29 rules. And something that I have been working on with my environmental companions is something that we are talking about in conservation. It has become also, even biocentrism has become very animal-centric. It has become very animal-centric. And what we are asking for, which the larger community of environmental scientists is asking for, or conservationist philosophers are asking for, is vegetal turn. And I feel Tinai has got the vegetal turn in it, because plant-centric, tree-centric, because vegetal turn is the primacy of trees, the primacy of vegetation. Because in some sense, we can still argue for preservation of tigers, preservation of, these animals, because they have some charismatic value. But the vegetal turn is something that I found in the Bishnois also. They say we will not wear indigo dresses because it's made from crushing a plant. Needless destruction of vegetarian vegetal matter. So the vegetal turn is very much in both pastoral communities, because vegetation becomes dwelling, because it becomes thatch, it becomes the grass, it becomes what you sleep on, it gives you the honey, it gives you the bee centrism, because bees and vegetation are very insects rather than tigers. So when you centralize vegetal turn, I think the dwelling becomes the raison d'etre for our ontic continuity. Landscape becomes a part, because vegetation has rasa. because rasa starts from vegetation. The juice of life and poesis come from vegetation. So I was looking at Tinai as a vegetal turn. It already presupposes the vegetal turn that these people are talking about. And vegetal turn, and it also struck me, I said that vegetation continues. Vegetation has continuity because, you know, there is this grass which is called a sword grass, or it's also called kushori, and different names are there. It's this large elephant grass. It never dies. You cut it and it keeps regenerating. Those, when you leave a land fallow for some time, the vegetation that belongs to that reappears again, even after many years of destruction. So Pugar, the kind of continuity of you leaving a mark on the world, if you want to call it that, very bad words, but unfortunately English doesn't capture that. Pugar of that vegetal turn, pugar of the tree outlasts the human smaller life. And for me, Tinai communities are trying to inscribe their lives on the ecospheric narrative. It is not humans making a narrative of nature and transmitting that nature to each person. It's human beings writing themselves as poetry into nature. We become the landscape and we write ourselves into it. And I think that is something that is beautifully brought out by your essay. I hope I will get to read the essay and talk a little more, learn a little more from this. So we can open it up for questions now. Deepanjali has a question. She has her hand raised.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, Deepanjali. I just want to make an observation regarding what Professor Baindura said. She has actually enriched my presentation with all of those observations. And I thank her so much for these, lovely kind of reference to the beach noise. I myself, quite fascinated with that because that's the beginning of the environment movement in this country. So that's really, I'm looking forward to her work on that. Thank you so much. And what you said about rasa is very new to me, a very new idea that it's a vegetal concept. I should ask Professor Shiv Prakash more about rasa and learn about that. Okay, thank you so much. You've only added and enriched this presentation. Thank you so much. And now to Deepanjali.
Thank you, Professor Nirmal, for I'm really touched by the presentation. I've heard you earlier also, and also Meera ma'am's comment later. This all made it very rich. My question is regarding the musicological aspect of Tinai. I mean, what is the importance for you? What is the importance of the musical note or the rhythmic and other tonal factors in your eco-musicological definition of Tinai? Because I remember in the beginning of the presentation, you talked about sa, the relationship between sa and pa, and the harmonious interpretation of it in, the human and non-human members, or between lovers, you said, which I found very, very beautiful. And I'm asking if there are other such interpretations that you made during your study, or how important is it even in your definition of Tinai ecomusicology? I'm also asking this because I'm thinking of the obsession in traditional musicology with with studying the notes, like ripped apart from, let alone nature or the environment, ripped apart from the society around it, like the obsession with studying the notes. So, what is the alternative in your own definition of it? I was just wondering about that.
Well, thank you for that question. What you heard just now in this documentary is something, probably it's not exactly the same because they are using it, as a kind of tool, as an instrument to make a point. But Tinai music is quite diverse in the sense each Tinai has its own music, instruments and modes and all of that. The songs that I myself used in the presentation are actually, as Meera ma'am said, they are supposed to be sung. Each song is said to be sung in a particular mode, and we really don't know how exactly they were done those days because there is no documentation of those things. Well, in Tamil Nadu, the earliest we have is, or shall we say, the continuing tradition here is the Bhakti tradition, which is really preserved by the saints of Saivite and Vaishnava saints. For that, we have very continuous tradition. But the other music, of course, we have, among the tribal people. But I said all of these different groups in different stages of threatened existence, because it's hard to see any of these tribal groups as the kind of Tinai that is represented in the early Tamil texts. I mean, they probably do, but then, we need to study each of these tribal groups and see how, that group represents a Tinai that is represented in the text. So that kind of work has not been done, though some of my students, for their doctoral dissertations did study these people, and they recorded the music and used it as primary resource for their dissertations. So they have studied the music of Mudugar. They've studied the music of another, tribe in the Western Ghats. They've studied their music and have tried to look at those things from an eco-critical perspective. But then deep musicological studies, have to be done here. But then about this two notes thing that I was talking about, it's one of the musicological relations called Inai. There are other types of relation too, but then this Inai relation is, is like the relationship between spouses. So that's what it literally means. And that relation is a fifth relation. That's the relation between, if you take, from Sa to Sa as your octave, then the Pa will be the fifth. So the relation between Sa and Pa is the, let's say, Inai relation, and all the other relations between Sa and Ma, and Sa and Ga, and Sa and Da, Sa, Ri, Sa, all of those are no match to Sa Pa, because, any other two notes on the octave are not going to sound identical as these two. My point was that this identity is not at the expense of difference. There is identity, because when an expert musician tunes the instrument, most of our Indian instruments, as you know, are tuned to Sa and Pa. And those two pitches should sound like one. They will tune until they sound like they are one pitch. That's how it's done. So that's what you call Inai. And that doesn't mean that Pa is now completely eliminated or Sa is completely eliminated. You still have them, but then they sound very identical. Now I use this because interestingly the word Tinai itself comes from this word. It Inai, it in will be tin with a nominal suffix I, it gives us the word Tinai. So that's the etymology if you're interested in it. And why would Tinai be called this unless this kind of a relationship is at the back of it? So when Tinai is talking about an entire community, I'm hoping, I'm presuming that that kind of a relationship informs, so the relation among all of the other members. That's the logic. Okay? So that's what I was trying to say. Well, we can talk about hours. There should be other questions as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Deepanjali. That was an interesting question. Anybody else? Please feel free to ask. Yes, Sharath, I see your hand up, please.
Yes, Nirmal sir, I am a second year student of MA Indian Philosophy course in Manipal, Department of Philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for a very, very enlightening and interesting talk. So I take my question forward from the observations of Meera ma'am. So if distance is one of the reasons for our non-harmony with nature, considering that the majority of the population across the world is moving towards urban centers, what is the means of introducing people to the concepts or the ideas that the Tinai stands for, And considering civilization as a concept itself is in a way linked to urbanization, is the solution heading towards de-civilizing in a sense? I know I'm pushing it a little too much, but what do you think is the way urban people can actually be introduced to the principles that Tinai stands for in a more meaningful way, considering they are so distanced from the environment in which Tinai actually came about? I hope I make sense.
Well, I'll just summarize, I mean, your question, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to answer a question you never asked. So are you saying that distance characterizes the urban people, and that's not the characteristic of Tinai society? So how do we change, I mean, or what can the urban people learn from Tinai? Is that what you're asking?
No, what I meant to say is that because the urban people are so distanced from nature in their daily lives, and considering Tinai as a principle has come out of people who lived in the forest and within the natural environment, how do you explain and get the Tinai principles out to urban people who don't share the same environment in their daily lives?
Well, thank you for that question. First of all, distance is an idea which Professor Meera has now introduced, and I would like to think more about it. I mean, I'm interested in aesthetic distance. I'm familiar with that concept, but I don't really use, the idea of distance very much in my own thinking and writing, but I will look into it. But I get your point. Now, this idea of taking interesting things, if I put it pretty roughly, from, these primal societies and those things which are convenient for us to be used in a non-primal context, that maybe a kind of an ameliorative measure. But what I'm asking for is a radical change of the world order, socio-political order. That's been my kind of focus for the last more than 40 years, I should say. I'm interested in a different world altogether. A world in which land are habited, and all of the occupants of the habitat kind of, again, articulate a kind of relationship that I was talking about. How to bring that about is the question. It's not just taking certain interesting ideas from the primal people, which are probably usable, will be useful to us in our, shall I say, not just non-primal, but even anti-primal in some ways. So this is a real, it will ultimately probably an act of exploitation, rather than, something that can be justified ethically, I think. So, like we have these questions when, students go and study these people, because like, what are we going to do to them? Like, so we end up saying, well, we will give a copy of the recorded songs to those people so that they can listen to them whenever they want, or something like that. If we take photographs of them, give them back to them so that they can also see them and that kind of thing. But that's, these are all very sort of, shall I say, cosmetic kind of change, compensations, if you permit me to use that word. But I'm asking for a more radical kind of a change. Wordsworth, for example, was probably never heard of Tinai, but he was wrestling with some of the questions that people like Professor Meera and myself, we are thinking about. Like, so, oh God, he says, I wish I were a pagan, he says. How does, it's just conversion. Giving up his Christianity will not do. That's not the point, right? So what will really, make him hear Proteus and Triton in the ocean, see them, and, relate to those beings to which, his ancestral, people, the Tinai communities that were living in England, were able to do. Like, so it's not that, it's not going back, to the past. So I'm not talking about a kind of a romantic past that existed, but I'm asking for a different social order itself, a political order, because I think it's ultimately the political will that decides the kind of societies we live in. And usually, I cite the example of 1991, because India until 1991 was an entirely different kind of an India. It was an agricultural India. We used to see the farmers with plows on their shoulders in the newspapers very often, but hardly, you ever see, and what the farmers are now reduced to. I mean, for about 2 years, they're kind of struggling. Well, that's all politics maybe, but again, the point is that post 91 India is an entirely different, India altogether, and that was possible. But it was not a change for the better. I really don't like this change. But then it was sheer political will. And some of the people who were responsible for that change, one of those persons was from my own alma mater, Madras Christian College, who was kind of drafting the new economic policy. So it is, we people can do it. Like if, the government, if there is political will, we probably can change this country, but would we want to? Now, that is the question.
We are almost running out of time, so maybe one, or if anybody else has a question, we can just combine the two questions and Professor Nirmal can make his closing remarks. Srividya, anybody else? This is your last chance. Then we can combine the questions. Otherwise, with Srividya's questions, we can end the session. Srividya, please go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hello, good afternoon, Professor. I'm a third year student from Karnavati University in Gandhinagar, Gujarat. So my question basically somewhat carries forward from the previous one, but it ties up with politics. In the context of personal politics, this idea of living with nature itself registers in my mind as a personal protest, because aaj ke time mein, if I can say so in Hindi and I can then convert it, translate it to English, it's like आप गांव जाके रहना चाहते हो, अगर आप if you want to live with nature, it in itself is somewhat seen as an escape, from responsibility, from living, from success itself. If you say like, why do we see so much greenery and nature in resorts? We've sort of like contained nature in these places, and we only access nature to sort of as a reprieve, but not as a way of life, and definitely not as a endpoint towards success. So our modern ambition and way of life is sort of detached from nature. And so if so I think that's where the disjoint is. We have sort of gone out of joint with nature. How would Tinai like reconcile with this detachment that we experience? And so that's why sort of the distance comes in. Sorry for elongating the question.
I'm talking about a relationship. Okay, I'm not talking about humans in one space and nature in another, and then this group going and somehow adjusting with that or making a relationship. I see this already. I am a part of the tiger, the tree, and the tree and the tiger are already a part of me. I'm looking at a kind of existence, a kind of being which is, let's say, primordial. I mean, it's not my choice. See, that's what I am. Like, I think Neil Averton is the one who asked this question: where do I begin and where do I end? Is my beginning and my end my skin? I mean, is that what you think about yourself? I certainly do not think of myself as just a body and mind as Descartes would. I certainly don't buy that idea. I probably would go with Heidegger. I mean, don't go with him all the way, but then, this idea of being in the world, if that makes any sense to you. It's not being and the world, but it is being in the world, the world being part of your being, that kind of, let's say, permit me to use this a big word, philosophical anthropology, if you like, myself is, I think, is what I'm trying to get at, through this presentation. But I didn't want to read a paper, philosophical paper, because I know that there are a lot of students here with different interests and different backgrounds. But then that is the core, the central idea, which kind of informs my whole presentation. You need to see yourself, as part of the tree and the tree part of you, and if that makes any sense to you.
Thank you, sir. Srividya, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Bayendra, Professor Selvamony.